The calendar turns to May 2025. The conflict in Ukraine rages on, a grim testament to unresolved tensions and enduring aggression. This month has been marked by a familiar tragic pattern. Fierce fighting continues to scar the landscape, particularly in the eastern and northern regions. Simultaneously, tentative diplomatic efforts have flickered, offering faint glimmers of hope amidst the overwhelming darkness of war. These talks, however, are fraught with complexity and distrust, their outcomes highly uncertain. The international community watches deeply concerned as the human cost of this protracted struggle continues to mount with each passing day, each new offensive, each failed negotiation. The situation on the ground remains incredibly volatile. Russian forces have reportedly made some advances in key areas, relentlessly pursuing their objectives. Ukrainian forces, bolstered by international support, continue to mount a determined defense of their sovereignty and territory. The strategic city of Chasiv Yar, for instance, has seen intense clashes as Russian troops pushed forward in mid-May. This relentless back and forth underscores the brutal reality of a war of attrition, where every inch of ground is fiercely contested, and the price of territorial control is paid in lives and widespread destruction. The resilience of the Ukrainian people remains a powerful narrative. Alongside the battlefield confrontations, the skies above Ukraine have become another major theater of war. Both Russia and Ukraine have increasingly relied on missile and drone strikes. These attacks target critical infrastructure, military positions, and tragically civilian areas far from the front lines. In May 2025, a significant escalation in such aerial assaults was observed, bringing the war directly to urban centers and spreading fear among populations already traumatized by years of conflict. The use of decoy drones alongside armed ones highlights the evolving sophisticated tactics employed in this aerial war. As we stand on this day, May 21, 2025, the conflict presents a deeply troubling picture. There are new initiatives for peace talks, yet they are shadowed by skepticism. There are reports of battlefield gains and losses, each representing a human drama of survival and loss. There is the constant rain of missiles and drones, a deadly lottery for those on the ground. And through it all, the civilian population endures unimaginable hardship. This report aims to shed light on these latest developments, providing an understanding of the current state of this devastating war and the faint, difficult path towards a potential peace. May 2025 witnessed a flurry of diplomatic activity, yet tangible breakthroughs towards peace remained elusive. A significant development occurred on May 19, when U.S. President Donald Trump and Russian President Vladimir Putin engaged in discussions. These talks centered on a potential ceasefire and broader peace negotiations. Following their conversation, an agreement was made to initiate bilateral negotiations between the United States and Russia. President Trump subsequently informed Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky and key European leaders about this new diplomatic track, injecting a fresh, albeit cautious, dynamic into the peace process. However, the substance of these proposed negotiations quickly highlighted the vast chasm between the warring parties. President Putin stated that Russia would soon present Ukraine with a detailed memorandum. This document would outline Moscow's conditions for a peace treaty. These conditions reportedly reiterated long-standing Russian demands. These include the establishment of a Russian proxy government in Ukraine and a formal commitment to Ukrainian neutrality, effectively ceding significant sovereignty. Such terms remain deeply unacceptable to Kiev, which views them as a fundamental denial of its right to self-determination and territorial integrity. President Zelensky, while confirming Ukraine's readiness for an unconditional ceasefire and direct negotiations, laid out clear counter-conditions. He proposed neutral venues for talks, suggesting Turkey, the Vatican, which had expressed interest in hosting, or Switzerland. Crucially, Zelensky emphasized that any meaningful negotiations must involve the United States and European powers. He also stressed that Russia must unequivocally recognize Ukraine's sovereignty and the legitimacy of its democratically elected government. Without this fundamental recognition, Kiev sees little prospect for genuine dialogue, fearing talks could become a mere smokescreen for continued Russian aggression. Earlier in May, other diplomatic maneuvers had also unfolded. President Putin announced a unilateral ceasefire from May 8 to May 11. Ukraine, however, did not reciprocate this gesture. Kiev demanded a more substantial month-long truce as a precondition for de-escalation. Undeterred, Putin then proposed unconditional talks to be held on May 15 in Turkey. President Zelensky agreed to attend these discussions. In a bold move, he publicly challenged President Putin to a personal meeting, seeking direct engagement at the highest level. These events underscore the complex dance of diplomacy, where gestures of peace are often intertwined with strategic posturing. The renewed focus on peace talks in May 2025 has been met with considerable skepticism from many observers. Several analysts, including a former Russian diplomat and a Ukrainian ex-military official, view these diplomatic initiatives as a potential strategic win for President Putin. They argue that Russia might be using the prospect of negotiations for several purposes. These could include delaying a comprehensive ceasefire, allowing Moscow to amass more troops and weaponry. It could also be an attempt to gain more Ukrainian territory while talks are underway, or simply to create an illusion of seeking peace to avoid further, more stringent U.S. sanctions. Adding to these concerns is President Putin's choice for Russia's lead negotiator, Vladimir Medinsky. Medinsky is known for his controversial historical views, which often align with Kremlin narratives that downplay Ukrainian sovereignty. Critics argue that this appointment signals a lack of genuine desire from Putin to negotiate meaningfully with Kiev. They suggest that Russia's proclaimed readiness for talks might be an imitation, a performance designed for an international audience rather than a sincere effort to end the bloodshed. The core demands for Ukraine's neutrality and a change in its government structure seem to support this interpretation for many. Despite the skepticism, the talks have produced some minor points of discussion. For instance, conversations between the US and Russia reportedly included the possibility of a 9-for-9 prisoner exchange. While small in the grand scheme of the conflict, such exchanges offer a rare humanitarian positive. Furthermore, President Trump mentioned the potential revival of US-Russian trade relations once an agreement is reached. He also suggested benefits for Ukraine's eventual reconstruction, painting a picture of a post-conflict future that, for now, seems distant and uncertain given the deep-seated disagreements. Pro-Kremlin analysts, unsurprisingly, offer a different perspective. They express optimism that these talks could ultimately force Ukraine to accept Russia's conditions. From their viewpoint, the negotiations represent a potential disaster for Ukraine, leading to a settlement largely on Moscow's terms. This starkly contrasting interpretation highlights the propaganda war that runs parallel to the physical conflict. Meanwhile, Europe has introduced its 17th round of sanctions against Moscow, targeting Russia's shadow fleet of tankers, financial institutions, and arms supply chains, though their impact is seen as limited without stronger U.S. measures. U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio indicated President Trump is currently reluctant to impose new sanctions but might reconsider if Russia continues its aggressive military actions. The month of May 2025 brought no respite from the terrifying reality of aerial bombardment for the people of Ukraine. Russian forces continued their relentless campaign of missile and drone strikes, targeting a wide array of locations across the country. Overnight on May 18th and 19th, a particularly massive assault was launched. Russia unleashed 112 Shahed drones and decoy drones against Ukraine. Ukrainian air defense forces heroically managed to down 76 of these aerial threats. However, 35 drones were reported as lost, meaning they either reached their targets or their fate remains unconfirmed, potentially impacting areas in Kharkiv, Sumy, Donetsk, Cherkasy, and Kirovohrad oblasts. This intense period of aerial attacks was not an isolated incident. Data collected between May 3rd and May 9th, 2025, recorded at least 30 separate Russian long-range missile and drone strikes. These attacks were primarily concentrated on Kyiv city and the surrounding Kyiv region. Central regions of Ukraine, including Cherkasy, Poltava, and Kirovohrad, also suffered significant bombardment. These strikes often target critical infrastructure, aiming to cripple Ukraine's ability to function and sustain its war effort. However, they invariably inflict civilian casualties and widespread fear, disrupting daily life and adding to the psychological trauma of the war. Ukraine, too, has demonstrated its capacity to strike back, particularly using drone technology. Between May 6th and May 8th, 2025, Ukrainian drone barrages caused significant disruptions to air traffic in and around Moscow. Reports indicated that hundreds of drones targeted the Russian capital. Russian forces claim to have intercepted over 500 drones in a single 24-hour period between May 6th and 7th. These audacious attacks signal Ukraine's growing ability to project power deep into Russian territory. challenging the Kremlin's narrative of a conflict confined to Ukraine's borders and bringing the war home to Russian citizens. During this period of heightened drone activity against Moscow, 5 distinct strike attempts were reported. One notable incident involved a direct hit on a military airfield causing unspecified damage. Another drone reportedly damaged a residential building, highlighting the risks to civilians even in retaliatory strikes. The scale of these attacks forced Russian authorities to implement drastic measures. Airport closures across Russia stranded an estimated 60,000 air passengers. Furthermore, cellular networks were reportedly shut down in Moscow and other areas to complicate drone navigation, indicating the level of concern these attacks generated within Russia. Section 5. The shifting sands, battlefield dynamics in eastern and northern Ukraine. The front lines in Ukraine remained intensely active throughout early to mid-May 2025, with fierce fighting reported across several key regions. In the Donetsk region, Russian forces pressed their offensives in multiple directions. They reportedly achieved advances south and southwest of Kostiantynivka, a strategically important area. Further gains were noted southwest of Pokrovsk and also north and northeast of Lyman. Early in May, Russian troops also managed to occupy a village situated west of Velika Novosilka, consolidating their positions. By May 19th, advances were confirmed in the hotly contested Chasiv Yar direction, a focal point of Russian efforts. The battle for control in Donetsk was not entirely one-sided. In the Toretsk direction, both Ukrainian and Russian forces reportedly made advances around May 19th, indicating a highly fluid and contested battlefield. This suggests localized counteroffensives by Ukrainian troops or struggles for tactical advantages by both sides. The intensity of these engagements underscores the strategic importance of the Donetsk region, which has been a primary objective for Russian forces since the conflict's escalation. The human cost of these advances, for both attackers and defenders, is undoubtedly immense, with each meter gained paid for in blood. In the Kharkiv region, Russian forces also made some gains near Kupiansk in early May. However, by May 19th, reports indicated that while limited ground attacks continued, they were not resulting in further confirmed advances in this sector. This could suggest either a stiffening of Ukrainian defenses or a tactical shift by Russian commanders. Similarly, in the Sumy region, Russian forces claimed advances near the international border, specifically northeast of Sumy city, during the early part of the month. Offensive operations continued in northern Sumy Oblast around May 19th, but without confirmed territorial changes, indicating ongoing pressure but perhaps not breakthroughs. Further north along the international border in Russia's Kursk Oblast, Ukrainian forces reportedly advanced into the southern outskirts of the town of Tetkino around May 19th. This suggests cross-border operations by Ukrainian units aiming to disrupt Russian logistics or bring the conflict onto Russian soil. Concurrently, Russian forces were reported to have advanced to the international border checkpoint southeast of Tetkino, indicating skirmishes and attempts to secure the border area. In Luhansk Oblast, Russian ground assaults persisted in the Kupiansk direction without advancing, while Ukrainian forces managed to achieve some gains west of Serhivka, showing resilience and an ability to reclaim territory. Section 6. Strategic maneuvers and military buildups. The battlefield advances and continued fighting in May 2025 are underpinned by broader military strategies and ongoing mobilizations. Russia, according to intelligence reports, has successfully conscripted approximately 160,000 new servicemen. Beyond conscription, Moscow continues an aggressive recruitment drive, enlisting around 50,000 soldiers each month. This significant influx of manpower is partly attributed to substantial enlistment bonuses offered to attract volunteers. This sustained effort to replenish and expand its forces indicates Russia's commitment to a long-term military engagement, aiming to overwhelm Ukrainian defenses through sheer numbers and persistent pressure across multiple fronts. Analysts suggest that President Putin's strategic aims may extend beyond the current lines of contact. There is concern that he seeks to avoid any ceasefire agreement that would allow Ukrainian forces to regroup, resupply, and fortify their defensive positions effectively. Instead, the period of supposed negotiation might be exploited by Russia to seize additional territory, particularly in eastern and northern Ukraine. Some reports even indicate a potential Russian objective of restoring the Kakhovka Dam, which was previously destroyed. a move that would have significant strategic and ecological implications for the southern regions of Ukraine. In a development with broader geopolitical implications, Russia is reportedly expanding its military infrastructure along its borders with NATO member states, specifically Finland and Estonia. Satellite imagery has revealed ongoing construction and renovation activities at military bases and other installations in Murmansk Oblast, the Komi Republic, and the Republic of Karelia. This buildup is widely interpreted as preparation for potential future aggression against NATO countries, or at the very least, a significant show of force aimed at intimidating the alliance. Finnish defense officials have publicly predicted a substantial increase in Russian forces deployed near the Finnish border once the active phase of the war in Ukraine concludes. Meanwhile, the fighting in regions like Zaporizhia and Kherson continues, though perhaps with less dramatic shifts in May 2025 compared to Donetsk. Russian forces maintained offensive operations in the Zaporizhia direction, probing Ukrainian lines and seeking weaknesses. In the Kherson direction, limited ground attacks by Russian troops were reported, but these did not result in confirmed advances by May 19. The overall intensity of political violence events in Ukraine saw a slight decrease of 2% between May 3 and 9, with 1,348 events recorded. However, this number still reflects a highly active and brutal conflict zone across vast swaths of the country. Section 7. Civilians in Crisis. The deepening humanitarian impact. The unyielding violence of the Ukraine-Russia conflict continues to exact a devastating toll on the civilian population. In the first part of May 2025 alone, the human cost remained tragically high. Between May 3 and May 9, Russian shelling, missile strikes, aerial bombs, and drone attacks killed at least 32 civilians. These deaths occurred across a wide geographical area, including the Dnipropetrovsk, Donetsk, Kharkiv, Kherson, Odessa, Sumy, and Zaporizhia regions, as well as in Ukraine's capital, Kyiv City. Each statistic represents a life cut short, a family shattered, and a community mourning irreplaceable losses. Specific incidents highlight the indiscriminate nature of these attacks and their horrifying impact on ordinary people. On May 7, 2025, Russian drones and missiles struck Kyiv City. In this attack, 2 civilians lost their lives, and 8 others sustained injuries. The capital, despite its robust air defenses, remains vulnerable. Just a day earlier, on May 6, Russian missiles hit Velika Chernechchina, a locality near Sumy City. This strike resulted in the deaths of 3 civilians. These events are not isolated, they form part of a consistent pattern of attacks that terrorize communities and strain emergency services to their limits. During that same week, from May 3 to May 9, there were 110 documented incidents of violence specifically targeting civilians. This marked a 4% increase in such incidents compared to the previous week, indicating a disturbing trend. These targeted attacks resulted in 36 fatalities, which, while a 12% decrease from the week prior, still represents an unacceptable level of civilian death. The psychological impact of living under constant threat of bombardment, displacement, and loss is immense. Millions of Ukrainians have been forced from their homes, their lives upended by a war they did not choose. The suffering is not confined to Ukrainian-controlled territories. Reports also indicate that Ukrainian shelling allegedly killed 1 civilian in the Russian-occupied part of the Kherson region during this same period. This underscores the tragic reality that in war, civilians on all sides of the front line are vulnerable. Furthermore, the conflict has seen horrific alleged atrocities. On May 3, 2025, in the Donetsk region, Russian forces reportedly executed 3 Ukrainian prisoners of war near the village of Novopil. Such reported war crimes demand thorough investigation and accountability, adding another layer of horror to this already brutal conflict. Section 8. Global Responses, International Aid and Sanctions. As the conflict grinds on into May 2025, international involvement remains a critical factor, shaping both Ukraine's ability to resist and the pressures exerted on Russia. Several allied nations have reaffirmed their commitment to supporting Ukraine through substantial military aid packages. Australia confirmed its decision to provide much-needed Abrams tanks to the Ukrainian armed forces. These heavy armored vehicles are expected to enhance Ukraine's capabilities in ground engagements, providing greater protection and firepower for its troops as they confront entrenched Russian positions and offensive maneuvers. European partners have also stepped up their contributions. Denmark announced a significant military aid package valued at approximately $632 million. This comprehensive package includes vital artillery systems, which are crucial for both offensive and defensive operations, as well as essential equipment for fighter jets, helping Ukraine maintain its air capabilities. Similarly, Finland signed an agreement to supply Ukraine with material and heavy ammunition worth $101 million. Notably, Finland plans to use profits generated from frozen Russian assets to fund this assistance, a move that seeks to make Russia indirectly pay for Ukraine's defense. While military aid flows into Ukraine, Western nations continue to employ economic sanctions as a tool to pressure Moscow. In May 2025, the European Union introduced its 17th round of sanctions against Russia. These latest measures specifically target Russia's shadow fleet of oil tankers, which Moscow has been using to circumvent existing oil price caps and sanctions. The new EU sanctions also aim at additional financial institutions and critical arms supply chains that support Russia's war machine. However, the effectiveness of these European sanctions is often debated, with some analysts suggesting they are less impactful without parallel and robust measures from the United States. The United States' stance on further sanctions appears more hesitant under the current administration. U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio indicated in May 2025 that President Donald Trump is reluctant to impose new sweeping sanctions on Russia at this juncture. This reluctance might be tied to the ongoing bilateral talks initiated between the U.S. and Russia. However, Secretary Rubio also suggested that this position could change if Russia continues its aggressive military campaign and shows no genuine commitment to de-escalation or a peaceful resolution. The U.S. administration may reconsider imposing further punitive economic measures on Moscow. Section 9, A Path Unclear, The Lingering Search for Resolution. As May 2025 draws to a close, the path towards a lasting and just peace in Ukraine remains profoundly unclear. The latest diplomatic overtures, while offering a sliver of hope, are shadowed by deep-seated mistrust and fundamentally divergent goals between Kiev and Moscow. Russia's insistence on terms that would effectively dismantle Ukrainian sovereignty stands as a primary obstacle. Ukraine, on the other hand, rightfully demands the full restoration of its territorial integrity and respect for its independence. Bridging this chasm requires more than just talks. It necessitates a fundamental shift in strategic calculations, particularly within the Kremlin. The continued intensity of the fighting across multiple fronts, coupled with the devastating missile and drone strikes, underscores the grim reality that military force still dictates the immediate trajectory of this conflict. Both sides are investing heavily in their war efforts, with Russia mobilizing vast numbers of new recruits, and Ukraine relying on international support to sustain its defense. The strategic buildups, particularly Russia's expansion of military infrastructure near NATO borders, also point towards a future where tensions may remain high, even if active hostilities in Ukraine were to subside. This broader geopolitical context complicates any simple resolution. The human cost of this protracted war is staggering and continues to grow daily. Civilians bear the brunt of the violence, facing death, injury, displacement, and immeasurable psychological trauma. The stories of loss and suffering from cities like Kharkiv, Sumy, and Kyiv, and from the embattled regions of Donetsk and Kherson, paint a harrowing picture of a nation under siege. The reports of alleged war crimes further deepen the wounds and highlight the urgent need for accountability and justice as part of any future peace process. True reconciliation cannot be built upon impunity for such grave violations. Ultimately, finding a resolution requires unwavering international commitment, not just in terms of aid, but in fostering genuine dialogue and maintaining pressure on all parties to respect international law. The people of Ukraine have endured unimaginable suffering for far too long. Their resilience is extraordinary, but it should not be endlessly tested. The world has a moral obligation to support their quest for peace, a peace that ensures their survival as a sovereign, independent nation, free from aggression. The search for this peace, however difficult and frustrating, must continue with renewed vigor and a clear-eyed understanding of the challenges ahead.